The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, everybody. This is Zoanne Tafoya from DKF Solutions on behalf of California Sanitation Risk Management Authority, CSRMA for short. Welcome to today's webinar. CSRMA is a self-insurance pool made up of 60 sanitation districts throughout California and provides these webinars as a means to spread best risk management practices and regulatory compliance information. Our speaker today is Andy Morrison, and Andy's going to provide some information about himself in a moment. But first, a few housekeeping items. I sent out an email to everyone in reference to the YouTube channel. If some of your staff or those that you know around you aren't able to attend because of the volume, you can refer back to that email to get on to the live YouTube. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. I believe that Andy doesn't have a problem if you do have a question in the middle. So go ahead and let us know about it. We are recording today's training, and it'll be available within the next week or two for your staff to review. With all of that, I think I'm going to turn it over because I think Andy's got a lot of information to give to us. Andy, good morning.
Good morning, Zoe, and good morning, everybody. I will say, Zoe, I won't be monitoring the chat for questions, so I'm counting on you to do that. And just feel free to interrupt me if one comes up. And so before I get into the content of the presentation, just a little bit about myself as it relates to vehicle inspections. And so I used to do this kind of work for a living. I was a collection system worker for many years, and then a supervisor, and then a manager. And I managed the collection system, the fleet, and the facility for Union Sand. You know, not only as I'm a former commercial driver, I used to have to fill out these inspections and conduct the inspections, but I also was responsible for training people how to do them. So when David approached me and asked me to put this together, I thought it's a bit narrow in scope. Shouldn't we do, you know, in vehicle inspections for commercial units? He said, no, we want it for the combination units. And so that's what we're doing today. So I'm going to be talking about, you know, pre-trip, during shift, and post-trip, and the types of things you should be looking for and doing as it relates to a combination unit. When I say combination unit, for anybody who happens to be new, I mean a combo of hydrojet and vacuum unit. So these units are typically used for cleaning sewers, but also storm drains as well. And so, come on, thing. Hey, there we go. Here's the outline of why we need to do them. I'll spend a little time talking about that. I always thought it's important to understand the why. You get a lot better at the what when you understand the why. And so what does the law require? I'm going to take a little look at that and bore you with some of the law. And then we'll get into what should be a part of a pre-trip inspection. Many may not have known there's actually a requirement for inspection throughout the shift during the operation of the vehicle. And then, of course, there's a post-trip inspection. Some agencies aren't doing this one, but all three of these are required to be done. And then at the end, I have some Q&A, but feel free to interrupt if that works better for you. So why do we do them? Well, obviously, it's required by law on all vehicles that are more than 26,000 gross vehicle weight rating, and a combination when you're towing a trailer greater than, I think it's 6,500 pounds. But for the combo unit, we're generally not towing trailers, but the law requires us to do it on these large vehicles like this. And also, there's a practical reason, is to find the problems before they become failures. It becomes even bigger concern with this much weight going down the road. We don't want to find out our brakes don't work, for example, or the mirrors aren't working when we're in an urban environment around people. And certainly the manufacturer has recommendations of things we're supposed to look for and do and maintain on these units. So we're going to be looking at that. And then obviously you work for a company or an agency, they have policy. So all those are good reasons to do the inspection, as because we're supposed to. And so let's look at what the law requires on a federal level. Title 49 talks about commercial drivers and having to do inspections. And in California, not to be outdone by the US government, we have our own rules. They're in Title 13, specifically Division 2, Chapter 6.5, Article 3, and subsection 1215. But if you really want to read it in a way that's understandable, it's in the California DMV handbook. Section 2.1 is all the stuff you're supposed to be looking at, but it's also covered and talked about in 3.1, 8.1, And 11.1 through 11.3 is really all the details you need. So if you're going to take your test and you have to do this in front of a DMV person who's going to sign you off or fail you, you want to study those sections and become familiar with them. And the law and this handbook talk about a pre-trip, a during trip, and a post-trip, and the need for them to be in writing, and sometimes it requires signatures. So let's take a peek at Title 13. And so this is the boring part. This is the actual law. It's unlawful for the driver. So this is on you, drivers, to drive a vehicle that's not safe to operate. So if it's not safe, it's not lawful for you to drive it. And then the daily inspection is required. All drivers shall perform vehicle inspections and submit written reports. And it refers to other parts of the law, including Title 49 from the federal regulations. But specifically, before you drive the vehicle, the driver shall. So this is not optional. You need to inspect it daily. So even if you drive it all the time, you're still required to do a pre-trip inspection. This is before you drive. And the reason is to ascertain the safe operation, to make sure it's in good working order. And then you got to review the last vehicle report. Now, maybe some agencies are turning the last one in and they don't have access to it, but the law requires you to look at the last one. So even if you're the one who did it, you're required to review it and then sign it. So this is really only if there was defects or deficiencies noted, and you need to sign it that, yes, it's been repaired. And so the mechanic needs to have repaired it. There's other sections that don't apply to school bus drivers, but we're not talking about them. So the daily report, it says every driver shall prepare a report in writing. So whether it's electronic or a piece of paper, these can't be up here. They need to be a written report. And I really think, here's the content of what needs to be in there. I'll get to my other thought in a moment here. I was getting ahead of myself.
Good morning,
so if
everybody.
you go to YouTube or whatever, or excuse me, Google and look up California Commercial Driver Handbook, you'll get this electronically, but you can also find this on YouTube. So the DMV has, and there's the YouTube link for you, or I'll just pull it down here so you can see what this looks like. And so when I push play, I'm going to turn the audio down just a little bit.
Solutions Group, folks,
this guy is like old school. He's going to walk you through how to do an inspection using Section 2. So for somebody who's not a strong reader, or they're very much a visual learner, they need to see it. This type of tool is pretty good. It walks you through the rules and how to do the inspection and what to look for. And so it's a useful tool that could come in handy for some people. They like YouTube and it'll work for you. So you don't have to just read a boring book. They got the whole handbook chaptered in YouTube, so you could watch it. And I'm thinking some people prefer to do that. So what does the actual handbook say in there about the types of inspections? Now, I told you they're in the laws and I showed you where they are, but here's where it is in the handbook. And I'm going to just read this to you. A vehicle inspection will help you find problems that could cause an accident or breakdown. Vehicle inspection should be done routinely before operating the vehicle. So this is a pre-trip. Review the last vehicle inspection report, and there it is again. Make sure the vehicle's been released for service by the mechanics, if applicable. That means if defect was found or it was in for service, that it's been released. And so the last vehicle report shows a clean bill of health, it's probably good. But if it shows a defect, you got to make sure it's been signed off. Then the motor carrier, that's your employer, must repair any items, whether they do it in-house or, contracted out, doesn't matter. But they need to repair anything that affects safety and then certify on the report the repairs were made. Now, remember, and this is important, when you get behind the wheel, you're responsible for the safe operation of that vehicle. You, the driver, not the agency, not the mechanic. So if the defects have been repaired, this is where you need to sign it. So you sign the previous driver's report, even if you're the previous driver. So there's detailed information on the specifics of this in section 11. And we're not going to cover section 11 today. That'll be homework for you, but we're going to cover enough specifics, you're going to get it. So that's what you need to do before. Let's talk about the trip inspection. So this is during a trip. There's things that you're required to look at. Obviously, your gauges, anything that you can hear or feel, that's not quite right. You're supposed to be paying attention to those things. Obviously, when you make a stop, you should be looking at your tires, your rims. If you've been driving for a while, maybe check the brakes again. But when you walk around and set out your cones, you should be looking at the lights and the reflectors and make sure everything is still there, and that whatever's attached to your vehicle is considered cargo and that it's secured down. So these things you're supposed to be doing during a trip inspection. There's many more things you should be doing during operation for a combo unit. I'll go into those details in a bit. And then the after trip inspection, that means at the end of the day, or your use of the vehicle, you need to fill out and turn in a vehicle condition report that you find any problems, you need to note them. If you didn't, you still need to fill it out. This one needs to be turned in. One of the best practices that I've seen for this, I'm borrowing from West Valley Sanitation District, because I think Ed Oyama and his folks did a really good job capturing a way to comply with the law. This is a pre and post trip inspection. And here you have the date, the vehicle ID, the pre-inspection time, the pre-trip, and the post-trip inspection time. And then as you look at a specific vehicle, so there should be a checklist for that specific vehicle. It's separate from this, but you got a place to say it's okay. And if you did find a defect, was it during the pre or the post? And for everything that is required in the commercial checklist is down here in this portion. And then I went too far. There's a checklist. I reviewed the last inspection report because you're required to. And I've inspected the vehicle, determined it's safe, or I've inspected the vehicle and found defects that the mechanic must fix. And then a place for the driver to sign it. If the defects have been corrected, there's the mechanic signature, and then there's the next driver, even if it's you, just a place to sign it. And this may seem a bit convoluted, but it really is one form instead of two forms. And they even created a flow chart. If there's no defects, you just follow the green arrows. And if there are defects, here's how you contend with those. And so this is double-sided, so it's got the instructions, the flow chart on one side, and then you have the pre-trip and post-trip inspection on the other side. Let's talk about some details in the pre-trip. So for the combination unit, it should include way more than what's required for the commercial driver checklist. And really, every vehicle that's a commercial vehicle, like a dump truck, a boom truck, for instance, or just a straight hydrojet, there should be other checklists that are specific and unique for that equipment and any appurtenance of attachments to that vehicle. And so one of the best ways to do it is a pictured SOP. Can be a very helpful way to make sure you're doing it. Let me borrow from West Valley again. In their pre-trip inspection, in addition to following the pre-trip, post-trip inspection report, they have these other checklists. So for the combination unit, you got to daily check and make sure that the truck is stocked with hand sanitizers, nozzles. How frustrating is it to go out there and somebody took nozzles off your truck because they had a stoppage last night and they didn't put it back? Well, you find out that stuff before you leave the yard. Any other things that you need, like your vacuum tubes, the hook to open the manhole or to reach down and grab stuff, cones, make sure you have enough. And you got forms that are in the unit, like for SSO response or whatnot, make sure they're stocked. And then there's things to check. like your water level, things to maintain, like greasing the turntable or cleaning the filters, and then a reminder to fill out the report. So I think there's other things that you may want to check for, like do you have drinking water? Do you have PPE, like extra gloves or hearing protection? Do you have soap, paper towels for cleanup? You don't want to get out on the job site and realize you don't have this stuff. So these daily checks and using a checklist that is make sure we have the things we need. And when I say a pictured SOP, it would look something like this. So it's a walkthrough how to do it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, the way you should leave a truck at the end of the day, because one of the first things you should do is, check under the hood before you even start it. And if you don't leave a truck in a certain way, like for Vactors, you can't really open the hood for a reel that needs hydraulics to move out. For the VacCon and for the Gap Vacs, they've designed them in such a way you can bypass the hydraulics and move them out without an engine running. But either way, you've got to get under the hood and check for things like leaks. The leaks you can see as you're approaching the vehicle, look on the ground, and you see any puddles under the truck, and you should be saying, that ain't right. And then you know where to go look or get a mechanic to help you figure out what kind of fluid that is and where it's coming from. But you should be checking the level of all the fluid levels that you can check. And so let's take a look on what that looks like. Like right here on this particular VacCon, and this is El Dorado Irrigation District's SOP, they spell out with the pictures and arrows. Here's where you check the coolant. Here's where you check the power steering and the belts and the hoses. And really, when you're looking at hoses, you should be looking for cracks or signs that fatiguing or leaks. And with belts, you really should pull on them, make sure there's not excessive play. If you can pull it more than 3/4 of an inch, it's starting to get loose, you should have a mechanic check it. And so you should be looking at the frame and the springs and the steering linkage and the brakes. If there's slack adjusters there, pull on them. And in the back, they probably do have slack adjusters that you can pull on. But as you got the hood open, you should be looking at the tires and the rims and make sure there's enough tread. 4 30 seconds on the front, 2 30 seconds on the back. And you can see the wear bars on the tires sometimes. But if you don't have enough tread or it's uneven wear pattern, you're going to want to bring it to the mechanic's attention. And then if you are low on fluid, you want to make sure you're putting the right fluid in. Here's the same truck from the other side. So, this particular SOP has pictures both sides of the engine. So on this side, an example of any kind of debris, remove that stuff out of there. Again, check your hoses and belts. And when you're looking at your leaf springs, here's an example from the commercial driver's manual. This is pretty exaggerated. It may not be that broken where it's bent up. It may just be that they're just a crack. And so you should be looking for rust, indicates that there's a crack there. They could still be a tight crack and it's a broken leaf spring. And so when you're looking at the lugs of the tires, same thing. Look for signs of rust, indicates that there's something that's loose. So let me press on. You're done checking everything under the hood. You close the hood, you go around to the front of the vehicle, and you should be looking at the vehicle. As you're walking around, you're not just looking at the commercial driver's checklist, you're also looking at what's unique to this vehicle. So we want to make sure we have enough cones. We want to make sure this rope that's here holding the guide hoses is secured and not able to fall down and get entangled somewhere. And make sure our vacuum hose is secured. Like on this Vactor here, it's secured down here, but on the VacCon, it's secured over here on the right, up top. So either way, make sure that it's on its boom support, and that this is a good time to look at the condition of the snorkel because it's down low. But if you did have the reel extended or turned out, make sure it's fully back. And if the case of the VacCon, that it's also pinned in the travel position when you're all done. And so you should be looking at the condition of the hose, that the valves are in the proper configuration, and that one of your friends didn't come move one of the valves. It's a good time to be looking at that. And as you walk around the vehicle, it's also a good time to jump up in the cab and turn on the lights and flashers. You can inspect not just the condition of the lenses, but that the lights are actually working. So as we go around the vehicle, let's go down the passenger side here on the Vactor. And you should be checking the water level and that the valves are in the right place. And you should be not just looking at your mirrors, but obviously you need to look at your mirrors. But this is another angle you can see that the boom is down on the rest. And, do I have the hose to connect to the hydrant? Do I have the spanner wrench? Because, somebody might have left the spanner wrench on the last hydrant. But do I have everything that I need? And so in some cases, there's going to be a screen in here that like a Y strainer that you need to take that out and clear it. You can do that now, or you can do it when you stop and fill for water. But there are some daily things you need to do. On the VACCON on the passenger side looks quite different. So however your tubes are secured, you should be looking that they are secured correctly and that they're latched, and that that your filler hose is rolled up. And again, when you're looking at tires and lugs, look for indication of rust. And when you have these dual tires back here, you need to stick your head in here to see if there's no rock in between the two tires, because that can come flying out and hit a car. Also, you need to check your mud flaps and make sure that they're where they're supposed to be. And this is a good time to reach in there, pull on the slack adjusters. This picture doesn't show it, but you can get a mechanic to show you where they are. But there should be about a 3/4 inch of movement on a slack adjuster. So on this right-hand side picture, you want to make sure your tank is down and that the door is secure. And it depends on what kind of machine you have. There are filters and screens that need to be cleaned, daily. And so you would, either clean them before you leave the yard or at the end of the day is fine. But you want to make sure they're clean. On the back door, before you leave, make sure that the door is shut completely and that this latch, the safety latch, is in place. Some sight levels, you're pulling a dipstick. Others, you're looking through a sight glass. And so if you're low on any fluids, you want to make sure you fill it before you leave. And you want to, except for the transmission, you want to check everything with the engine off. The transmission, sometimes the dipstick will say on one side when it's cold and the engine off, the other side it'll say hot and running. So pay attention to the details when you're checking the fluid levels on a transmission. So as we go down the side of the truck, again, here's the VACCON. We're looking at the valving, make sure it's in the proper position, and that these cabinets, all cabinet doors should be secured. And depending where you work, some communities, they need to be locked too. I know when I helped one agency, they said we have to lock it even after we open it on the job site, because we walk around the truck and they'll open the cabinet and steal stuff while we're on the far side of the truck. So you want to make sure they're closed though for travel. We don't lose stuff, and open them up to make sure that the contents are there too. And so we're checking the condition of all the things that we're supposed to be using that day, like our handgun, or if you have a lateral cleaning hose, that both of them are in good working order. That make sure there's no obvious damage. Around the back of the truck, I'm going to talk a little bit later of why you should leave this door open overnight. But when you do come here, if it is open, it's a good time to check the seal, and then if it's make sure it's latched, and then look at the condition of your hose, and that this valve is shut, your gravity decant, and that your light bars, everything are working, your mud flaps are where they're supposed to be. Typically, you got cone storage in the front and the back, sometimes the side. So make sure you have enough cones, and if your signs are stored somewhere in here, make sure you have enough signs and the stands that you need for the day as well. And some of these vacuum tubes are latched with clamps. Sometimes you use bungee cords. If you're using bungees, make sure they're not weather cracked, because when those things break, and it's not going to be good. It hits you in the face or the eye. So find things before they fail. On the driver's side of the Vactor truck, it's going to look different from a VacCon and a GapVax, but there's some things that you need to clean out for debris, like in the cyclonic separator. You need to open this door, make sure there's no debris and whatnot in there. When you do open that door, step to the side. It could have water trapped in there. When I say water, it's not exactly water. You don't want it on you, so step aside. And then you want to make sure that you're looking at all the wheels, all the tires, and that you look at simple stuff like your fuel tanks are strapped on correctly, and that there's no leakage and whatnot. And on the VacCon, on the driver's side, we've got several cabinets. Again, make sure that what's in there is supposed to be in there, and that that they're secured. And we got a fire extinguisher here, so you want to make sure that your fire extinguisher has been serviced regularly. So read the tag, read the gauge, make sure the pin hasn't been pulled, and replace as needed. So all the way around, we're not just doing the commercial list of the mirrors and the lights, but we're looking at all the unique equipment. So in this case, we have an auxiliary engine. We have more stuff to check there. So obviously, you could check with tire pressure with a gauge, and then on dualies, you can see a flat on a single tire, but a dually you may not see that it's low. So if you're checking it with a mallet or a sledgehammer, make sure you hit both the outside and the inside tire to make sure. If it's got a good recoil, it's full of air. If it feels kind of soft, it's not likely full, and you need to check it with a gauge and fill it. Keep an eye on it. So on the pony motor or the auxiliary engine, again, you got to check the filters and the fluids and the belts and the hoses. And on this particular one, there's a VacCon. There's a little side box here. You check the condition of the belt that's coming off the drive of the engine. It's actually driving the pump. So you want to make sure that's in good condition too for the drive belt. And any time you have a trap like this full of debris, clean it out. Don't leave it like that. And so you should be checking these things every day, not once in a great while. That's the mechanic's job. It is the driver's job to make sure these things are topped off, ready to work and working. If they're not, sure, it can be the mechanic's job to maintain the engine, but it's the driver's job to make sure that all these things are in good working order. Don't just rely on a mechanic did it a month ago. So here's an example of a GapVax, and you got the tubes are secured down here. Is a good example of bungees being used. So looking for cracks on the bungees, and then let me clear my throat for a second. So here's an example over on the right of a screen. It's a type of filter. This needs to be pulled out and washed or rinsed off. And on a Vactor that it has, let me go back a couple of screens. The Vactor on the rear, down here, you have a pump that's behind this bumper is typically where it is. And it's got drains on both ends of this pump. And typically they're just a plug. But if you're smart and a little bit lazy like me, you'll plumb some pipe and valve out there that bring the valves out to this bumper here. And this pump should be purged, if not every day, at least weekly. Check the manufacturer's recommendation. So that needs to be with the pump engaged at idle, and it'll cycle one way, push the water and any silt and debris out, and cycle the other way, push it out. And so you got this, even at idle, it's quite a lot of spraying water 20, 30 feet. So you do want to do it in an area where you can do that without causing problems. Let me get back to the gap vacs. Sometimes it's handy on these cabinets to just laminate the checklist on what should be in a cabinet, all cabinets, pictures of the nozzles on the cabinet with the nozzles, and you should have one cabinet designated clean where people can put their lunchbox or the drinking water and paper towels and whatnot. And you should not keep that with the tools and other things that touch sewage. So using the checklist for that vehicle can be quite handy. And now, once you do your pre-trip and you're using a checklist, either on like a Fleetio app or a clipboard and paper, use the checklist as a reminder. Oh yeah, I need to check the tread, or I need to do the brake inspection. I forgot I need to do the in-cab portion of the brakes. And I'm not going to go over the details of that because it's in section 2 and section 11 of the book. But you use the checklist as a reminder that you did everything you're supposed to do. And then write down the time you checked it in the morning that it checked out okay. And then in the afternoon, use the same checklist. If you do like West Valley or other agencies, they do a second one. Now, what should you check during the operation? Obviously, it says pay attention when you're driving to the gauges, sounds, vibration, any odors that you could smell. And you obviously should be checking your mirrors, looking down the side of the vehicle, make sure everything's there, not falling off, that sort of stuff. But all day long, when you're operating the equipment, you should be paying attention to the controls, how they function. Are they working properly? Are the gauges working properly? Does it sound normal? Is there a strange vibration? We should be looking at the hoses, the fittings, the nozzles as we pay it out and retrieve it back in. Every time we should be looking at it, not just, looking at something attractive that walks by. We should be looking at our equipment. So the booms, as we extend the boom, look at the where it rides between where it telescopes. There's some shims or sliders that can wear out. So look for signs of wear. On the snorkel itself, and anywhere there's an elbow, you're looking for signs of wear. If it's starting to show signs of wear, you need to bring it to the attention of the mechanics. The tubes themselves and the clamps, they wear out. So tubes can crack and clamps can become fatigued or break. And the debris tank, when you're dumping, you should not just be watching it, you should be looking at it. The door, the screens, the seals. And, if you have blowers or you have fans, you should be cleaning out the screens and the traps every time you dump it. So here's an example of a hose that's worn out, and another example of a hose with some weather cracking. But if you look beyond the skin of the hose, and here the complete skin is missing, the strength of this hose is in this nylon braiding, and in the leader hose, it's a steel web braiding. But if this skin is jeopardized, it should be wrapped to protect the nylon braiding. If the nylon braiding shows signs of wear, it should be replaced, because these things will blow under pressure. If you run them like this and the nylon braiding is worn, it'll burst. And I've seen it burst right next to a guy's head and blew his hat over a fence and 30 feet away. But it blew his glasses off too. And it could have easily caused damage to his eyes, because, 1,200 pounds of water in your eyeball is no fun. And so these things don't always blow in the line. They can blow right next to your face. And so you want to repair these damaged skins. Like this one can be taped up if the nylon's in good shape. This one has been out in the sun. It's a good example of why you should store your equipment under cover. And if you can't, at least put a shade cover over the rubber parts. But replacing the hose is needed. The nozzles during the day, if you've got some of the older spinning nozzles like a Gopher root saw, you're going to want to lubricate these things because they can seize up. And so this is more than just looking at it. But if you're not going to use it for the rest of the day, or you're taking a lunch break, that's enough time to just squirt it with some WD or some other water displacement type lubrication. Looking at the clamps, two different style clamps here. The things that can fatigue are right here where they connect. So this hook could straighten out, or this one can. And so keep an eye on these things. And it's not uncommon for the snorkel tube to be a slightly different diameter. So one clamp is adjusted different from the rest. And typically we spray that one one color, so we're not constantly adjusting these things, but all the rest of the clamps can be the same size. These things don't need to be so tight that you're straining to get them clamped, tight enough that they stay in place and don't pop off. When you're using your tubes, look along these welds and anywhere down this barrel section for cracks and fatiguing that you need to replace them as they wear out. As you're dumping, as you're getting tubes down off the thing, pay attention to the springs, the hinges, and we don't want this thing not spring assist. So when you pull it down, it's boom, it comes down all at once because a spring failed. So the operator should be paying attention to this stuff. It's part of the equipment. It needs to be looked at. And eventually they do fail. When you decant your water using the gravity decant, you should inspect this hose as you unfurl it and you put it back, that you make sure that you replace this hose when it wears out. Because, you go to decant and then it's leaking sewage all over the ground. You don't want that. As you dump it, you don't just rely on the body wash to clean out the back, but you dump it and rinse off the door, rinse off the screen that's right here on most models for the decant and for the pump decant. The gravity and the pump may have two different screens. And then rinse off this seal here and the mating surface. And then when you're dumping it and this door is out of the way and it cannot close on you, make sure you rinse all the way up inside here. There's a float level ball that indicates when it's full and not. That ball should be washed off. There's a micro screen up there or some other screen that keeps the debris from the tank going up into the vacuum system. Rinse all of that off. We don't want that stuff getting plugged. If you're losing vacuum, that could be part of the problem, is that thing's completely plugged. So you rinse it all off, and then you should inspect the door seal. Typically it's on the door and the mating surface. And if it's looking dry, take the time to lubricate it with some lithium grease or whatever the manufacturer recommends. The other seal that you need to pay attention to and rinse off is up here at the connection from the vacuum at the debris tank to the vacuum tube, or excuse me, the boom and snorkel. There's a mating surface here, and there will be a seal either here or here, and these things can become dry and they can stick to each other. So they need to be cleaned off, and then it's occasionally somebody needs to get up there and lubricate that thing. And so the best time to do this is when you're raising it up and take a look at it. And you dump it at the end of the day, you should be doing this. This is all part of your inspection that you should be doing throughout the day and using this. At the end of the day, there's a requirement for a post-trip inspection. And so it's required to be completed and turned in. And ask yourself, was there any damage during the day? So look up. We may have went under some tree branches. You thought it was okay, but it actually bent the arrow board or damaged something up high or on the side, or it may not be obvious. Like when you hit a mirror, that's obvious, but somewhere up above, it may not be as obvious. For the combo unit, it's really important, in my opinion, to have it ready for the next day, because it's a kind of an emergency response vehicle responding to an overflow. So it should be full of water and full of fuel. So top it off with fuel. And I know some mechanics, if not all of them, they don't want these things left full of water because it's a lot of weight on the vehicle. I understand that. So, but if you can't fill it up with water while you do the pre-trip, you really should have it full of water, so that at least one of them, so that you can respond to an event. And I say leave the debris tank open and use the door prop. so that the first moment when you go out there, they can see the tank is empty. Because when you dump a tank and close the door, you can't tell if it's dumped or there's a little bit in there. I know of a story where we had a time where the combo was sent out to do some potholing. The guy who did it thought he was just sucking up dirt, and so he dumped it in a vacant lot, but there was several hundred gallons of sewage in there, and the float doesn't come up until you have way more than several hundred gallons in there. And so he dumped a very stinky, muddy mess. He needed to suck it all up again. And the same with the reel, especially true on the Vactors. If they can only extend out hydraulically, do it before you shut off the engine. So at the beginning of the next day, it's easy to open the hood and check the oil with the engine off. And so anything you use during the day or anything that broke, replace it. And then that applies to forms and supplies, nozzles, cones, signs, whatever. And so if there was anything that failed in your post-trip inspection, if it requires it, you need to tag out the vehicle so that it doesn't go out the next day. So put a red tag right on the driver's door, or pull the keys and take them to the mechanic so that somebody else can't do it. And so you go back and use that checklist that we had earlier to do the post-trip. So this whole thing is more than just a simple checklist. Doing these tasks and making sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to be is going to save you time. It's going to save the company money. I know it takes time to do it, and if you're doing it right, you're going to spend at least 20 minutes in the yard before you leave, and another 10, 15 minutes at the end of the day. And it's time well spent, because an accident or an injury from one of these things can gobble up a lot of time, especially if somebody is injured or there's a vehicle accident involved. So we avoid the downtime, we avoid those not fun investigations and accident reports. If there was an accident and it related to something that should have been caught during a pre-trip, the first question they're going to ask the driver is, show me your pre-trip inspection, or did you do a pre-trip inspection? And they're going to go back to the SOP and the inspection. And so not only is there problems at work for you, the employer, the driver, but as the driver, if you get a citation for not having done an inspection, or you have something wrong that you should have caught on an inspection, you can get a citation, and that ends up on your record, not the agency's. So it's best to do this. They pay you by the hour, so take the time to do it right. So at this time, it's a good time to do question and answer. Zoe, did any come up?
No, we don't have any at this moment. Anybody have a question, just go ahead and go to the questions link and jot down your question, and I can relay it over to Andy. Some great information, Andy. I want you not to forget to mention your wonderful book that you were instrumental in doing. There you go. And you can go to the DKF website to go ahead and purchase this if you haven't already got it. I think it's highly recommended to have in your library. Andy, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the creation of it and why it came about.
Yeah, so you can see that it's me, Lenny, and Sam, and David put together a book that frankly I wish I had when I started in the business. This book is written for entry level, but even if you've been in the business 2 to 4 years, you may find stuff in there, valuable information. So I wish I had this when I started. I could have learned the business faster. It's the whole thing, but it's easier to read than say Ken Carey. Not that that's hard to read, but this thing was written the way that we would talk to each other. It's got pictures. It's got how to calculate volume on an overflow and determine start time. It's got all kinds of stuff. And any questions yet?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Dominic asks when the presentation will be recorded so that he can send it out to all of his commercial drivers for review. And it will be recorded, and it should be available within a week or so. You can buy this book that Andy's talking about at training.dkfsolutions.com. So you can go to that link and it should be right there in the front. You can go ahead and select it. And again, I highly recommend it for at least having in your library, if not to give to each of the guys or gals when they come into the field. It is a wonderful book that's got some great pictures. It's just the whole way it's set up is so unique that I think it's the size that's nice. You can throw it into a lunchbox even and have the guys peruse or the gals peruse when they're out working in the field as well. So definitely a great book.
And I would say, yeah, I agree with that. But if you wanted a book on pre-trip inspections, really the state of California already wrote one. It's the Commercial Driver's Handbook. So that one, there's YouTube videos, or you could just get a PDF off DMV.
Perfect. Rick is asking also, is this PowerPoint going to be available for them? And I don't have a copy of that, Andy. So if you wanted to shoot me over the PowerPoint, I can make it available to everybody if they would like to do that.
Yeah, I'll do it as a PDF with 2 slides per page in color.
That would be awesome. So Rick, I'll go ahead and forward that over. So if anyone wants that, you guys have my email. I sent over a reminder. Just shoot me an email saying, yes, Zoe, we would like to get a copy of that PowerPoint presentation. Awesome. I think that's all the questions that we have at this moment. I don't see anyone else jotting anything down. Thank you so much, Andy, for your wealth of knowledge.
Welcome. And thank you.
All the different types out there.
I changed my mind. I'm going to do it as single slide per page because some of the font is probably too small.
Okay. And some of the pictures were pretty graphic as far as where they want to do the inspections and that type of thing. So that would probably be a good thing.
Yeah, and again, those are unique to that equipment, but I think they're very helpful to have a picture to remind somebody, oh yeah, check that. That's where this is.
Definitely, definitely. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have this recorded for future reference. So if anyone does want their staff to do that, just go ahead and go back to our site, and it should be there available for anyone to view. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there, and we will talk with you next time.
Bye, everybody.